project proposal and statement of intention. This semester for IAS371, I'm going to create an artistic response to Francis Weller's teachings on the 5 gates of grief from his book The Wild Edge of Sorrow. The 5 gates of grief differ from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work on the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance, in that they're doorways into the experience of grief and detail the many ways that we can enter that experience. The first is that everything we love we will lose. The second is the places inside us that have not known love. The third is all the sorrows of the world. The fourth is what we expected to receive and did not. The fifth is ancestral grief. I've been facilitating and attending grief circles and rituals for several years, and I'm drawn to create an immersive visual experience to accompany grief work. I'm going to conduct some research into the art of abstraction and how to move from an initial intellectual idea to imagery that invites silence, contemplation and hopefully transcendence, and also explore some new techniques and mediums. My morphological analysis problem began with the question, how do I create an artwork that expresses the human experience of grief and loss, specifically an artwork that moves away from the figurative toward a level of abstraction? Firstly, monochrome. So removal of colour strikes me as the deepest way to communicate the experience of grief. It's stark and immediate and hits all at once and hides nothing. Also, in layers, the way levels of surfaces build up interests me, and levels of transparency like water. I like the way meaning isn't immediately apparent, and there's an appreciation of the interaction between the physical elements in the piece and the subject matter, and how things become a world within a world. I'm also drawn to, in my previous works, focus, and how one central focus allows a lot of room, a lot of space to really see and contemplate things in a new way. I'm drawn to hands and feet and body parts. They capture the sensual and bring me into connection with this finite body and form, which grief also does. And finally, reverence has been a theme in my previous work. I very much want the ordinary to become transcendent. I want to feel a little bit of sacredness and silence and everything, and I'd like my artwork to reflect that. Some questions emerging from my morphological analysis include, how do I contribute to a sense of reverence and silence in my project? How do I move from the figurative to the abstract? How can I use layering to deepen impact and encourage physical interaction? How can point of view and focus be used to convey the experience of grief? And how do I avoid imposing my ideas and ideals on the viewer? Some creative thinkers that informed my work began with Cy Twombly. I saw a large exhibition of his at the Brandhorst Museum in Munich recently, and I'm struck by the scale he uses and the way meaninglessness is kind of celebrated. Sarah pointed me toward Godwin Bradbeer, who doesn't do abstract work so much, but he's very interested in beauty and using monochrome to create a sense of beauty, and has a great technique with chinagraph pencils and burnishing with a silver spoon and charcoal to build up layers and create luminescence. And Ross Bleckner, who was very interested in grief himself, who did a lot of work during the AIDS epidemic and explored painting as a memorial. Some other artists that I found myself drawn to through the Tate Modern website, Grace Gardner with her Yugoslavia works, the Balkan Wars, very beautiful. The Mark Francis stuff, he uses this quite hard plastic coating on his work. I'm very drawn to the horizontal in Matt Davies' work, and this idea in Wyn Jones and the Jacinta Feeney work of like tearing and holes and layering really intrigued me. Going deeper into the visual literature review, Mark Rothko is probably the biggest influencer of abstract expressionism, and my own personal doorway into how can abstract art be used to communicate grief, and the transcendent. I don't know if I really have any words. I'm quite awed by the simplicity of it and the glowing nature of these really simple forms and lines. And my mind can kind of go, oh, you know, this piece in particular, red on maroon, it is a portal, it is a gateway, there's columns there. But when I look at it, all that kind of falls away and there's just nothingness, which really attracts me. He used a lot of colour and is most well known probably for these horizontal squares of colour, but toward the end of his career in life he worked increasingly in monochrome and really wanted this sense of what is a cathedral, how can art mirror that holiness, how can it just provide a space for nothingness, a space that holds us in all of human experiences that we might be bringing to the moment when we look at these artworks. He also works in massive scale, and that really attracts me with this project. I don't think I'm going to have time to do something in scale, especially since I want the focus really to be on exploration and technique and finding what attracts me in the abstract. But eventually, like bigger than human size pieces, well and truly create that awe and nothingness. Ian McKeever, I stumbled on him in the Tate Art Gallery, and he does a lot of monochrome work as well. Very simple. He uses a lot of different techniques, printmaking techniques, and as well as drawing techniques and painting techniques. But I find there's a lot of movement in these pictures that speak to me. Eva Hess, in particular, her paintings, she's more well known as a sculptor, but these paintings are so simple and they're so nothing but everything at the same time. I mean, my mind can say the untitled on the right is a sun and there's a landscape. My mind could say it's an eye. My mind could put a lot of ideas and concepts on top of that image, but they don't really belong there. There's just a feeling of darkness and layers and movement. She used mostly ink washes, and I definitely want to explore this way of working more. Simple lines and layers. So, as mentioned, I want this to be very much a focus on exploration of the 5 gates of grief. Say I take an idea, such as everything that we love that we'll lose, as the first gate of grief, and I wonder what could that look like, without getting too intellectual about it, without having to make something that means something. It's kind of the way I want to approach this project, to create a lot and then just see what happens. I'm not particularly interested in my own experiences of the artist of expressing grief. This isn't really an expressionistic kind of space at this point. It might become that, which would be really interesting, a way to express my own grief. But at the moment I'm more wanting that sense of transcendence. I've also initiated some correspondence with a member of the Woodford Folk Festival team around the possibility of creating a death cafe at the festival. And the dream would be to have these 5 artworks, the 5 gates of grief, installed there, and that would be a space for people to gather and talk about death, to gather and talk about grief, and perhaps even to, maybe there's a stage in there, and it's a collaborative project where someone hosts a songs of grief and loss session every day, where people can just come and immerse themselves in sad music. That's still in process, not sure where that's going to go, but it's kind of exciting. I've basically need a lot of equipment, which I've been accumulating to really explore different things. I want to play with resists. I want to play with embedding medium into a surface with methylated spirits and pastels and charcoal. I want to play with washes. And definitely this sterling silver burnishing method on China graph pencils that Godwin Bradbeer made such beautiful work of in his drawings. And I want the focus to be on drawing for this project. I may well use, ink washes and paintbrushes and stuff, but drawing appeals to me. The physical connection, the really close physical connection with what I'm working on, as does working back into the surface, scraping away, working back, adding layers, scraping away, working back. And I'm excited to see what I discover. Some ethical considerations that occurred to me in this is that it seems to be a reality that most people are very poorly equipped to deal with grief. There's not much literacy around grief, and it's a subject that, what I've found over the past few years, immediately polarizes people. So when I say, for example, invite someone to come to a grief ritual, there's either an immediate yes, absolutely, it's full being, yes, I need that, or an experience of, no way, no, I've got no desire to go there. And that, in a sense, is quite, it makes this very clear. There's no confusion there. It's like it's either for you or it isn't. But I do need to be aware, especially if this becomes a project at Woodford Folk Festival as part of a death cafe, that it needs to be handled with great sensitivity and with a lot of acceptance and openness. On my skill as facilitator, which I certainly have no qualms about. Another big consideration for me is that there are really, for people who don't consider themselves overtly religious, there's really nowhere for non-believers to go to be held during an experience of grief and loss that tears one's world apart. And there's a gap there, there's a vacuum. And I want to find some way to contribute to that, again with sensitivity, without being too in your face. The next concern for me is that Woodford Folk Festival, initially the contact was begun around this idea of how do we draw more attention to our bequesting programs so people could leave the festival something when they die in their wills. And I'm very concerned about how that could be handled in an ethical and tasteful way. If it's not, it could have very much come across as some kind of sales pitch, which is just like shudder. So the ideas I've been playing with are just basically like a little stand in the corner of the room that has some information where people can take or not on the bequesting program. If they're drawn to it, great. If not, great. And the other concern is around, are there any insurance requirements for being a facilitator to hold the space for a death cafe? And from my research so far, there appears no, because it's like, I'm not pretending to be a mental health professional. This is about differentiating between what is a death cafe versus what is a grief circle. I'm definitely drawn to grief work and holding grief circles, and I've done a lot of it. But in order to provide a really clear space and not get sort of mixed up in, yes, I do require professional indemnity insurance, I do need to be a member of a professional association, etc., etc., it's really just a conversation about death, and it's a conversation in which there's no leading, there's no agenda, there's no spin, there's no teachings. So my artwork can have the teachings embedded in them in a very gentle way, but the actual holding of a death cafe based around, let's say, 20 or 30 people gathering at Woodford Festival at a set time each day, there's none of that. It's simply, what do you want to talk about? What's on your mind about death? How do you think? Really simple questions. What do you think about your own death? And then letting the group direct the conversation. and hold the space for each other. So it's been great to get some clarity around that. Okay, so that's me. Thank you.